Hello, I am Candice Hamilton, the Executive Director of the West Virginia Chapter, American Academy of Pediatrics. I am pleased to introduce the new Say Yes to Safe Sleep for Babies training module, which is part of our Babies Safe and Sound campaign, a project of Team for West Virginia Children. Every 10 days, a healthy baby dies in West Virginia because of unsafe sleep practices. The good news is that these deaths can be prevented with consistent messaging and family-centered education. There are two parts to this training module. Part 1 is an overview of sleep-related infant deaths and will cover the latest research and recommendations on infant safe sleep from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the impact of risk factors such as maternal smoking, and recent findings about the impact of social norms and social networks on the acceptance of safe sleep practices. Dr. Rachel Moon, chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Task Force on SIDS and SIDS researcher at the University of Virginia, will present this section. Dr. Moon is the Harrison Distinguished Teaching Professor of Pediatrics and the Division Chief of General Pediatrics at the University of Virginia and is the former Associate Editor for the Journal of Pediatrics. Dr. Suzanne Bronheim will present Part 2 of the module, which will cover the Campaign with Conversations approach, a family-centered model which integrates promotion of safe sleep and issues such as breastfeeding. Participants will learn how to shift from telling recommendations to becoming an information resource and partner in problem solving with families. Dr. Bronheim is an Adjunct Associate Research Professor in the Department of Pediatrics within the Georgetown University Center for Children and Human Development. She was the Technical Assistance Director for the National Action Partnership to Promote Safe Sleep and was the lead author on the Building on Campaigns with Conversations models. Two brief vignettes will be presented to highlight the concept of the conversations approach. Lee Ann Romeo, a registered nurse and childbirth educator at United Hospital Center, and Beverly Kitchen, a registered nurse and regional care coordinator with the Right from the Start, will present the vignettes. Samples of these scripts can be found in the informational packet link downloaded. This course qualifies continuing education credits for physicians, nurses, and social workers, and is also West Virginia STARS approved for early childhood professionals. Persons seeking completion through West Virginia STARS must do this through their website. For participants seeking only a certificate of participation, click the completion certificate linked located below the video window. Fill out the simple form and you will be provided a link to download the certificate in PDF format, which you can print and fill out with your information. For persons seeking continuing education credit, click the CE link and register. A CE certificate will be automatically emailed to you once you have registered and completed a short evaluation and post-test. Additional supplemental materials can be downloaded by clicking on the link for informational packet at the bottom of this video. Please remember, free educational materials can always be ordered online at safesoundbabies.com. And now let's begin Part 1 with an overview of sleep-related infant deaths with Dr. Rachel Moon.
Hi, I'm Rachel Moon. I'm a professor of pediatrics at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, and I'm chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Task Force on SIDS. And today, I'm going to be talking about sudden and unexpected infant deaths. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to start with some definitions and a little bit of pathophysiology, nothing scary, about sudden and unexpected infant deaths. I'm going to talk about some current data trends, both nationally and in West Virginia. I'm going to talk about the role of social networks and norms in decision-making, and then I'm going to end by talking about how we can incorporate these social networks and norms in our public health strategies. So I'm going to start with SUID rates and trends. And so that we're all on the same page, I'm going to start with a couple of definitions. So the first definition is SUID, or SUID, and it stands for sudden and unexpected infant death. And this is exactly what it sounds like. This is when an infant, so someone younger than 365 days of age, dies suddenly and unexpectedly. In the literature, you'll also see it referred to as SUDI, which is sudden and unexpected death in infancy. We tend to, in the US, we tend to use the term SUID, whereas the Europeans and the Australians and New Zealanders tend to use SUDI. So when you look at sudden and unexpected infant deaths, the vast majority of them occur during sleep or in a sleep environment, and so we call these sleep-related deaths. Approximately 1/4 of these are coded as accidental suffocation and strangulation in bed, and then the rest of them are coded as either SIDS or ill-defined or unknown cause death. If you look at the trends of SUID deaths by cause over the last 20 or 30 years, you can see that the orange line in the middle, the SIDS line, has dramatically declined. But you'll also notice that the unknown cause line, which is the green line, and the accidental suffocation and strangulation in bed line, which is the purple line, have both risen over the past 20 years, such that the combined rate for all SUIDs, which is the blue line up at top, really has not changed much for the past 20 or 30 years. So the other thing to think about is are the racial and ethnic disparities. So this graph shows those trends, and as you can see, they've been pretty flat over the last 20 or 30 years, and you can see at the top the race ethnicity that has the highest risk or the highest prevalence are the American Indian Alaska Natives, closely followed by the non-Hispanic blacks. Non-Hispanic whites are the orange line kind of in the middle, and then underneath that are the Hispanics, and then the Asian Pacific Islanders. So you can see that the non-Hispanic blacks and the American Indian Alaska Natives, their rates are at least double that of the other racial and ethnic groups. So what's happening in West Virginia? In your packet, you should have pretty detailed recent information about what's going on in West Virginia with regards to these deaths. But we do know that more than 30 deaths are occurring every year in West Virginia. And the most common risk factors that we see in these deaths are hazardous bedding, mothers smoking, having smoked during pregnancy, prematurity, that the baby was found on either the stomach or the side, and bed sharing. Those are the most common risk factors that we see in West Virginia. So now I'm going to move on to physiology and mechanisms of safe sleep. So asphyxia is when you don't have enough oxygen in your system. And we know that asphyxia has always been a part of SIDS. And many risk factors are associated with environments that are potentially asphyxiating, which block the flow of oxygen into the baby's body. So sleeping on the stomach or side, soft bedding, pillows, bumper pads, things like that, and bed sharing. All of those are associated with potentially asphyxiating environments. So there are some asphyxial situations that would cause death in any baby, but in most of these situations, not all babies die. And that's the big question. Why is it that some babies die and some babies don't? The triple risk model tells us that there are three components to the mechanism. First is a vulnerable baby, and this baby is vulnerable because there's a brainstem dysfunction or some gene polymorphism, and a polymorphism is a slight change in the gene. It's not a mutation, but it's a different way of how it's expressed. And those impact the baby and make the baby vulnerable largely because they create an arousal defect. So these babies cannot wake up. They cannot arouse, and they do not arouse appropriately when they're in a situation where they're not getting enough oxygen. And then you take this vulnerable baby and you put it through a critical developmental period. And we know that the highest risk of SIDS is between 2 and 4 months, and for accidental suffocation is between 1 and 4 months. So these deaths occur at this period of time during this critical developmental period, and we know that 90% of these deaths occur before 6 months. And then you have this vulnerable baby going through this critical developmental period, and then you stress the baby with an outside stressor. And that could be sleep position, either the prone position or the side position, smoke exposure, soft bedding, bed sharing, all of these are outside stressors. And when you have all three of them together, then there's this confluence and this perfect storm that results in death of the baby. The other way to look at this is the interplay between genetics and environment. And you can look at this for almost any disease that's out there. I like to use the example of cardiac disease in an adult. So if somebody has a heart attack, what has gone on before that? So at one end of the spectrum, you have somebody who it's all just genetics. So they have no risk factors at all. So this would be the marathoner who dropped dead of a heart attack. And it always makes the news because it's so rare and so stunning. And everybody says, oh my gosh, that person did everything right. He ate well and healthfully, he exercised, he didn't smoke, he only drank once a week. He did everything right. And for that person, it was all genetics. At the other end of the spectrum is the person who has a lot of lifestyle and environmental challenges. So perhaps this person smokes 2 packs a day. And eats fast food 3 times a day, weighs 400 pounds, and doesn't exercise, and just on and on and on. And so then those are the people that we call, a walking heart attack. And so when that person does have a heart attack, we're not surprised. So you have those 2 extremes, but the vast majority of people who have a heart attack are somewhere in the middle. So there's some genetics, and then there's some lifestyle and environment. And so that's the same as it is with SIDS and with these sudden and unexpected infant deaths. There are very few babies for whom it's all genetic. So these are the babies whom the parents did everything right. So the baby's in a pristine crib, on their back, is breastfed, all of that. Doesn't happen very often, but that's all genetics. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have a baby who is in an environment where every single baby that's in that environment would have died. So maybe a baby who falls off the bed and gets caught between the headboard and the mattress. And every baby would have died in that situation. But then in the middle, you have 90-95% of these babies, there's some lifestyle and environment and some genetics. And the thing is, we can't tell who has what, and we can't tell the genetics of the baby at this point in time. So we have to focus on lifestyle and environment. So when we talk about the genetics, we're talking about brain dysfunction. And Hannah Kinney is a neuropathologist up at Boston Children's. And she and her group have found abnormalities in the autonomic control in the brainstem. And this centers around decreased neurotransmitter binding. And these neurotransmitters include serotonin, acetylcholine, glutamine, GABA, others. And there's a whole network dysfunction of these neurotransmitters. And so these babies, you need these neurotransmitters to be able to sense and respond when you have hypoxia, which means you don't have enough oxygen in your system, or hypercarbia, when you don't have enough carbon dioxide in your system. And so if you have a network dysfunction in your neurotransmitters, you're not going to be able to sense this or respond to this. So in conjunction with this, Debbie Wiesmeyer and others have found polymorphisms in serotonin transporter protein genes. And these polymorphisms create these abnormalities in autonomic control that Hannah Kinney has found. So it fits very nicely. And we know that up to 70% of these babies have these neurotransmitter abnormalities. And these abnormalities are not present in babies who died from other reasons. So here's a slide of 2 babies and the serotonin receptor binding. And on the left-hand side, you can see a baby who died of SIDS. And on the right-hand side is a control baby, a baby who died of something else. And as you can see, there's a vast difference in what is lit up in the middle of the slide. So on the right-hand side, the control baby, you can see that there's normal serotonergic receptor binding, whereas on the left, there's virtually none. And we know that serotonin has a lot of effects on homeostatic function. So we know that it has an impact on blood pressure, heart rate, temperature control, respiration, upper airway control, and we are now learning that it has effects on sleep and arousal. So it's really, really important. So what happens when you don't arouse? So if you have some asphyxia, and you're not perfusing your brain very well, you're not getting enough blood to your brain, then you should arouse, you should wake up. And what should happen is that you should either lift your head up, you should turn your head, or you should do something to change your environment. And we know that everybody does this every night because all of us have periods where we have a little bit of hypoxia. And what will happen usually is that you'll kick off the covers, or you'll change position, or you'll sigh, or you'll yawn, or you'll do something like that, and then your oxygen level will go back up. So if you don't arouse and you don't lift your head, you don't turn your head, then you continue to become more hypoxic, and this just leads to this continuing these continuing steps where you then develop bradycardia and gasping, and then you die. So for the non-vulnerable baby, the baby who doesn't have an arousal defect, there's a balance between protection and risk. And if you tip too far on the risk side, then you tip into the disease category. And for this instance, what we're talking about when we talk about disease is we're talking about sudden and unexpected infant death, because there is no way that you can see what the disease is before the actual death happens. So for the non-vulnerable baby, there is a balance. So if you are vulnerable, it tips the balance so that you are already very, very close or closer to that disease border. So when we talk about risk factors, there are two basic reasons why risk factors are risk factors. The first is because the risk factors make it more difficult for the baby to wake up or to arouse. So prone and side sleeping, everybody likes their baby to sleep on their stomach or their side because they don't wake up, and they sleep longer and they sleep deeper. But what that means is that they are more difficult to arouse. Smoke exposure, both prenatally and postnatally, we know that that impacts your arousal threshold. That makes it more difficult for you to arouse. Back sleeping, breastfeeding, room sharing without bed sharing, pacifiers all increase arousability. They make it easier for you to arouse. The second reason that risk factors are because they might create potentially asphyxiating environments. So bed sharing, soft bedding, prone and side sleeping, these all create potentially asphyxiating environments. So here are some pictures that I just pulled off the web when I Googled sleeping baby, and these are all potentially asphyxiating environments. So when you have vulnerability and unsafe sleep, then that tips you over into the disease category. And so then what we're trying to do with the recommendations are we're trying to impact arousal. And these are the level A recommendations. Level A means those are the ones with the strongest strength of recommendation, the strongest evidence. And you can see all of the ones that are boxed in red, those all impact arousal. These all create potentially asphyxiating environments. So what we're trying to do with safe sleep is we're trying to tip the balance. We're trying to tip the balance, particularly for these vulnerable babies, back into being healthy and away from disease. And so the goal of the safe sleep guidelines are twofold. One is to increase arousability, and the second is to decrease those asphyxiating environments. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about smoking and how smoking impacts the risk of sudden and unexpected infant death. So these are smoking rates by state. So on the left-hand side, so in 2017, the CDC, they published results from this behavioral risk factor surveillance system, and you can see that the darker blue the state is, the higher the adult smoking rate is in that state. And as you can see, West Virginia is very, very dark blue. On the right-hand side are the SUID rates. And again, the darker the orange is, the higher the SUID rate is. And you can see that there is pretty marked concordance there. So the states that tend to be bluer on the left tend to be more orange on the right. So there is definitely a correlation, or at least an association, between the smoking rates in that state and the SUID rates in that state. So the percentage of women who smoke while pregnant, this is from CNN. Again, the darker the red, the higher the percentages. And again, you can see that West Virginia is the highest. So when you smoke during pregnancy, your baby sees every single one of those cigarettes, and that all adds up. So if you just smoke 1 cigarette a day, then your baby sees 13 packs of cigarettes during your pregnancy. If you smoke 5 cigarettes a day, it's 67 packs. If you smoke 10 cigarettes a day, which isn't actually a lot, that's only half a pack, that's 135 cigarettes packs of cigarettes that your baby is seeing. And when we talk about smoking, remember that I said that smoking impacts arousal. So these are graphs of smoking and arousal in term babies at different phases of sleep. And the black is the smoking group, and the white columns are the non-smoking groups. And this is how quickly they arouse. And so if you are supine and in quiet sleep, if you are a baby of a smoker, then you have much increased arousal thresholds, particularly at 2 to 3 months of age. So then when we look at smoking and arousal in preterm, now this is a little bit different. This is arousals, not arousal threshold. So if you have smoking, you have fewer arousal. If you have smoking parent, you have fewer arousals than if you don't have a parent who smokes. So arousal threshold increases, which means that you have fewer arousals. And when I talk about smoking, I'm also talking about vaping. We don't know all of the impacts about vaping, but we know that vaping is highly addictive and that the nicotine content in Juuls and other e-cigarettes are very high. And so 1 Juul is equivalent to 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes a day, packs, I mean. Let me say that again. So 1 Juul, 1 e-cigarette, has the equivalent nicotine as 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes. And when we look at the impacts of maternal smoking on the fetus, there are lots, not only from the nicotine, but also from the carbon monoxide. And it results in reduced birth weight, it reduces in damage to the lungs and in damage to the brains. So even 1 cigarette a day increases your risk. So we did a study where we looked at CDC data and we calculated the risk of SUID with smoking. And 1 cigarette a day during pregnancy doubles your baby's risk of SUID. And this risk increases linearly with every cigarette. So on the graph on the right, you can see that up to 20 cigarettes, it is a linear risk. So the more you smoke, the higher your baby's risk is. So there are lots of consequences that are causally linked to exposure to cigarettes smoke. So middle ear disease for children, respiratory symptoms, impaired lung function, lower respiratory illness, and SIDS. And 22% of SUID can be attributed to smoking. So if people stop smoking during pregnancy and after the babies were born, then 22% fewer babies would die. So that's more than 800 babies every year in the US. So next I want to talk about the interaction between smoking and bed sharing. And this is an analysis that was done by Bob Carpenter, and he looked at bed sharing for babies whose parents smoked and babies whose parents did not smoke. And if you look right here at the red box, these are the risks of SUID if you are bed sharing and if you have one or both parents who smoke. So as you can see, if you're in the first column there, if you're room sharing, there's not too much risk. So that's room sharing without bed sharing. If both of your parents are doing it, or your mother is doing it, you have a slightly increased risk. But if you are bed sharing, then you have a much increased risk. So at 2 weeks of age, if the mother's partner is smoking, your risk is 17 times the risk if you were not bed sharing and your parents were not smoking. If your mother smokes, it's almost 50 times, and if both parents are smoking, it's almost 65 times the risk. The risk is a little bit lower, but still very high at 10 weeks. So if the mother smokes, it's 20 times the risk and 28 times the risk if both parents are smoking. And at 20 weeks, it's lower, but still significantly higher. And if you look at this box at the 2-week period, if you're bed sharing and smoking, that is a really terrible, terrible combination. And also look at the very bottom where it says inestimably large. That means if the mother is an illegal drug user and you are bed sharing at 2 weeks, your risk of SUID is so high they can't even calculate it. So this tells you, this is smoking versus non-smoker parents, and this is your risk of death at each age if you are bed sharing. So where the line across about 2/3 of the way down, the horizontal line where it says 1, that means that there is no increased risk. And at the bottom, you can see the age in weeks. So when you get to about 22 weeks of life, if neither parent smokes and you are bed sharing, then you are at about the same risk as if you were not bed sharing. If both of your parents smoke, you never get to that no risk level. So you can see the boxes where I pointed out where at 20 to 22 weeks, if neither parent smoke, you get to the same risk as if you were not bed sharing, but you never get to that risk even if you draw that curve out if your parents are smoking. Okay, now changing gears again, I'm going to now talk about social networks and social norms. So what are social networks? The social networks are not just Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, things like that. The social network, your social network, are the people that you can communicate with every single day. So your family, your friends, your peers, the people that you go to when you need help, the people that you get support from. And we know that there are a lot of behaviors that are not scientifically based. We know that people don't necessarily change their behaviors just because a new study came out about that. So it's not entirely based on scientific information. What is very, very important in terms of behaviors is what other people are telling you and what you perceive to be what you should do. And much of this can be non-factual. So, and this is true for everything, but this is particularly true for infant sleep practices. So social norms are the rules of the group, so that tell you what the things are and what values you should have, what attitudes you should have, and what behaviors you should have. So if it's a descriptive norm, it is what you perceive to be normal or prevalent behavior. So this is, so if you have a high school student in your home and he wants to go to the party, and he says, well, Mom, everybody's going, that is a descriptive norm. An injunctive norm is what you perceive to be acceptable, what you think other people think that you should do. So you are most likely to do what you perceive to be normal and acceptable behavior so that people don't judge you and you're not stigmatized. And your social norms are influenced by your social networks because those social networks have people in them, and those people have attitudes and norms, and you perceive those norms to be what you should do. So why do we care? We care because social norms and social networks, if they are contrary to what we are recommending, if they are telling people that you shouldn't do that, then that's a major barrier. And in order for us to be able to better improve and better target our educational messages, we have to understand these norms and these networks. So we did an analysis of social network types for 402 mothers of young infants. And we found that there are basically two types of networks for mothers. The first type of network is the exclusive network. And this is the network where it's all relatives. So if you look at this little schematic here, the black circle in the middle is the mother. And she's the center of the social network. And she's in social network parlance, you would call her the ego. And then the people around her are the members of her network. And you can see that all of them are squares, which means that they are relatives or kin. And you can see that they're all connected by these thick black lines. And those are the tie strengths. So that's how well those people know each other and how much they communicate with each other. So you can see that this mother is surrounded by all of these people who are relatives, and all of these relatives know each other. And so they're all talking to each other all the time. The other kind of network is the expansive network. So again, the mother is the black circle, kind of towards the left in the middle. And you can see that some of the people in her network are squares, and so those are relatives, and some are circles, and those are non-relatives. You can also see that some of those lines are thick and black, so those are very strong ties. Others are less black or thinner, and those are weaker ties. So those are people that she's not as close to, or she hasn't known for as long, or she doesn't talk to as often, but they are still in her network. So what's interesting is that exclusive networks, mothers who have exclusive network types are more likely to be younger mothers who have older network members. So these are the mothers, the young mothers, whose network members are their older relatives. So her mother, her aunt, her older cousin, her mother-in-law, her godmother, her father. These mothers tend not to be married, and they are more likely to be African American. Mothers who have expansive networks are more likely to be older mothers with people in their network that are about the same age as them. So these are peers, friends, co-workers, people like that. These mothers tend to be married, they tend to be more educated and have higher income levels, and they are more likely to be Caucasian. So how powerful are these norms? So if the norm in your network is to not put the baby on the back, then you are 88% less likely to put your baby on the back. If the norm within your network is to bed share, you are more than 3 times more likely to bed share. If the norm in your network is to use soft bedding, you are more than 4 times more likely to use soft bedding. So this is an example. These are social networks of a bunch of mothers, and each little cluster is a social network for a single mother. And these mothers over here are mothers who put their babies on their back last night for sleeping. And the very, very dark black circles are people within their network who sometimes, at least sometimes, encourage the mothers not to put the babies on the back. So then if you compare these networks to the networks of mothers who didn't put their babies on the back last night, you can see that there is a lot more black there. So many more people were telling these mothers that it was okay not to put their babies on their back. So again, these social networks and these social norms are very, very powerful. And I'm going to talk about why this is important as I talk about how mothers make decisions. And again, I think this is really important because we need to know how mothers are making decisions so that we can try to intervene and we can try to influence mothers at their decision points. So the first thing that mothers do is that they crowdsource information. So for those of you who are not hip to the lingo and are old like me, crowdsourcing may not be a familiar term to you. So basically, crowdsourcing means you ask everybody that you know, and you source your information from a crowd. So here is a quote from a mother. I go with how much to feed a 6-month-old or something like that. I went on Pinterest and they had all these little graph charts of how to feed and when to feed. I have a coworker who has a 1-year-old, so I asked her what she did. I bounced back to everybody. And then I asked my mom, well, how many times are you all feeding the kids in the daycare? Like that. And then I got my final answer when I went to the doctor this Friday. So it's like kind of, I'll take everything from everywhere. And another mother said, I really like gathering information, and the internet's kind of an unlimited way as a source of information. And you can go to lots and lots of sources at one time versus like my mom is one source, and that's limited. So that last mother talked about the internet, and the internet has increasingly become this trusted source of information. I find that the listserv information is more reliable. We had these 4-week-old babies, and a mom said that her baby was constipated and that the doctor's advice was to give him a laxative. But I was like, OMG. I mean, I think I felt like my heart stopped. I'm still traumatized by some poor mother following advice from a crazy pediatrician to think that you should give your baby some. It made no sense to me. So I find if she had asked that question at the listserv, she would get better advice than following the advice of this doctor. And another mother said, because sometimes it's easy. If, you're just sitting there and there's a question that's not life or death, a question like, what color should baby's poop be? Like, you're gonna get the right answer, and the internet's gonna get that right. I don't think that somebody's gonna be wrong about it. So for stuff like that, I feel like there's no reason to bother somebody else with that kind of question. So once mothers crowdsource that information, it's easy when everybody agrees. So the doctor had given me his advice, and of course I'm going to listen to the doctor. But I did check with my mom too, and then I just kind of asked a couple of sources, like maybe my aunt, because she's a nurse as well, just to kind of see if the information is the same. So consistency of the messaging is critical, because if there's consensus and there's consistency, then mothers are more likely to believe that that's the right answer. But when the sources don't agree, then the mothers have to weigh their choices. It's not always consistent which I follow for each topic. It's just more of what feels good, what makes more sense to me among the different sources, while giving maybe different weights to each one, but still being this just feels best to me in the end. So they weigh their choices, and ultimately it comes down to maternal instinct. And this is a quote from a 14-year-old mother. We all come hardwired with heaven's intuition, and then intuition is somehow amplified for me. I can say, once I had my baby, I can kind of decipher what makes sense to me logically and what doesn't. If somebody says something, sometimes you can just identify in life in general what's for you and what's not for you. And so I think that that's typically my approach when taking or listening to forms of advice. So this 14-year-old mother had so much confidence in her own instinct and her own judgment. But even if you have a lot of confidence, you still need reassurance. I feel like I have good judgment, so I trust myself for the most part, but then I'm always looking for that reassurance. So usually I'll turn to whomever, whether it's my sister or the pediatricians. Ultimately, I make a decision based on what I know about my kids. So this is a flow chart of how mothers make decisions regarding infant care. So they need to make a decision, so then they seek advice from multiple sources. If all of the sources agree, then they either decide to follow the advice, which they're most likely to do, or they might not. And then they might use maternal instinct to make that decision. If the sources don't agree, then they have to weigh all of the advice received, and they have to use their maternal instinct to decide what they're going to do before they make a decision. So why are these social networks and norms important? They are often the first people the mother will ask. They're often the last people the mother will ask. And there are multiple points at which they can influence behavior. And mothers don't want to be judged. And so they tend to do what the social networks tell them to do. So how do we compete with or work with the social network? So first of all, I think it's important to understand that there are these social networks and these social norms. And then we need to know the evidence so that we can proactively anticipate the questions and concerns about what we are recommending. And we also have to remember that healthcare professionals are trusted sources. So this is a graph from Forbes magazine from last year. This is the rating of America's most trusted and least trusted professions. So you can see that medical professionals, so nurses and doctors, are very, very high in terms of trust level. So they are at the top of the trusted professions. And then you'll see towards the bottom, I always chuckle to see that the only one that is lower than car salespeople, actually the same, are members of Congress. So again, healthcare professionals are trusted sources of safe sleep information specifically. But if you look at this schematic on the right, you can see that almost half of caregivers didn't receive the correct advice about safe sleep practices from their healthcare professionals. And we know that caregivers who receive correct advice were less likely to place their babies on their stomach or side. So again, there are all of these points. The little starbursts are all of the points at which we can influence behavior. So these are all places where we can talk to the mother or the father and hope to influence their decision making. The other thing that's really important to know is that you may only need one champion in your social network. So we know that with regards to breastfeeding, that breastfeeding moms were able to go against formula feeding norms in their network if they had one strong champion. And particularly if that champion was their partner, then they felt very comfortable going against those norms. And then I recently found out that my husband's side didn't either. They were all formula fed, so this was new to both families. It's almost like a culture shock. And I was skeptical about it at first because my boob's a little A cup. So I was like, I'm gonna try, but I doubt I'll be successful. But my husband was very supportive. And this woman whom we're quoting here, she breastfed her baby for a year. So how can we change the norm? So again, norms are perceptions. They are not necessarily reality. So there's this perception, and you have probably heard this if you have high school students in your home or you've worked with high school students. There is this perception that all high school students drink, and that's not the truth. And so one high school, they actually did an ad campaign within the school to try to decrease student drinking. So they put up posters with the fact that few high school students drink. So they put up these posters that said 4 out of 5 Panthers do not drink alcohol, join the club. So they're clearly trying to change norms here. Photo contests are a way to help to change the norm because they enhance the perception that everybody is doing it. They enhance those descriptive norms. So so October is SIDS Awareness Month, and the NIH and the CDC have had this hashtag Safe Sleep Snap Challenge where you can upload pictures of babies that are in safe sleep environments. And many communities have done this, and this is a really nice way of, number one, enhancing this perception that everyone is doing it, and number two, developing and creating a repository of pictures where babies are sleeping safely so that, again, it becomes the norm. I don't know how many of you have been to Petrified Forest National Park, but they did this very interesting social experiment. They had a problem because people were stealing the petrified wood. And it was actually becoming a really big problem. So they decided that they were going to put signs asking people not to take the wood. And they decided to try out 2 different signs, and the social scientists decided to study what happened after they put up these 2 signs. So the first sign was this one: your heritage is being vandalized every day by theft losses of petrified wood of 14 tons a year, mostly one small piece at a time. And then the second sign was something that was simple, that just said, please don't remove the petrified wood from in the park in order to preserve the natural state of the petrified forest. So which one do you think is more likely to result in fewer thefts of wood? If you guessed this one, then that was wrong, because around that sign there was almost 5 times increased theft. And why is that? Because you're establishing a norm here, because the norm that people are perceiving is that everybody's doing it. And so if everybody's doing it, then it's okay for me to do it. And in fact, I should do it because I'm going to miss out if I don't do it. So, the sign on the right was much more successful because it didn't establish that stealing wood was the norm. Another example is this electric company in the Washington, D.C. area, Pepco. And what they do now is they send out report cards to customers. And they compare your home with efficient homes and with similar homes. And you clearly want to be in the blue, but many people obviously are not, and they're in the gray. And so they give you this report card so you can see what other people are doing, and you can compare yourself. And if you are doing worse than the efficient homes, then you should be doing better. And they've actually shown that this does work. So what they've shown is that that if you are in the similar homes category, you will increase your efficiency by 8.6%. But what if you are that blue house, your home, and what if you're more efficient than everybody else? So what they found was that if they sent out these report cards, the people were in the most efficient homes, they actually decreased efficiency by almost 6%. But then they discovered that there was this little trick to keep those people in the most efficient homes equally as efficient. So what they did was, it was a smiley face. And that smiley face gave these people approval, and they showed appreciation that these people were doing a good job, and they acknowledged that, and that was enough to keep those people doing a good job. And you may think that this seems a little crazy, but one of my colleagues who's my age is taking piano lessons, and I was telling her about this experiment, and I said, that's crazy. And she said, no, it's not. One time my piano teacher came, and at the end of my piano lesson, she gave me a little sticker with a smiley face on it, and ever since then, I have been working to get that sticker, and I practice so much harder because I want that sticker. And I feel so good every time I get that sticker because it means that she likes me. And so if this 50-some aged woman will do this for a little sticky little sticker that has a smiley face on her piano notebook, then think about what we could do just by showing approval and appreciation to people who are putting their babies on their back, who are not bed sharing, who are not smoking. We could keep those people on that path. The other thing that's really important is that you have to give them tips on how to succeed. So if you just tell them to do it, then one can quickly become overwhelmed. So you need to give them, so if you tell me that my electricity use is terrible, then I don't know the first thing to do to try to improve that. And so they give tips. So turn out the lights when they're not needed. Improve the shading for your windows. So if you give them some concrete tips on how to do it, then that's another way to help them succeed. So when we think about the social norms, do we need to think about how we talk to people? So here's a slide that you probably have all seen, and it shows how as the rate of back sleeping has gone up, the rates of SIDS have gone down. But there is this plateau in both of them. And so many times what we'll hear is, despite everything that we've been doing, 25% of babies still don't sleep on their back. What is the problem? And we're all woe is me about this. But maybe the way that we want to say this, especially if we're talking to families, if we want to take advantage of social norms, wow, I'd be interested in knowing why your baby is sleeping on the stomach. You know, because most parents I work with now, they're sleeping their babies on their back. So I'd be interested to know what your reasoning for that was. And then you also want to make sure that you're appreciating the parents and you're giving them that smiley face if they are putting the babies on their back. You also want to speak out. So if you see displays or commercials or advertisements that have unsafe sleep environments, you want to speak out. So this is a Twitter exchange between Charlie's Kids and Keurig. Apparently, I did not see the commercial, but apparently Keurig had a commercial that had a baby in an unsafe sleep environment. And so Charlie's Kids called them out on that on Twitter. And Keurig replied back, at Charlie's Kids, we really appreciate your feedback, and we recently revised our TV ad, which can be seen here. Another example of this is this textbook, Avery's Diseases of the Newborn. And this is the foremost neonatology textbook for doctors. And as you can see here, the photo is of a baby that is sleeping in an unsafe sleep environment. And Dr. Michael Goodstein, who's another member of the AAP Task Force on SIDS, received his textbook in the mail and saw this picture and freaked out. And so he called the publisher, and the publisher said, sorry, no can do. The book's already been published, it's too late. Sorry, not a problem. They didn't see it as a problem because this was an artistic photo, and it was not meant to portray a real sleep environment. And so Mike actually emailed some of us on the task force, and we decided that we would try to mobilize people. And so we asked pediatricians who were on the committee for injury prevention, violence, and poison prevention, and child death review. And then we actually contacted our SIDS colleagues, research colleagues all over the world. And this publisher was flooded with letters and emails and phone calls about this book. And so they changed the cover of the book. And for those who had already received a hardback cover of the book, they actually provided a new cover that was on an adhesive back that they could remove the backing and easily paste over the cover of the book. So speaking out does help, and it also does change the norms, because clearly people will respond either consciously or unconsciously to these pictures. So in conclusion, I just want to mention again that, what the goals of the Safe Sleep Guidelines are. They're to increase arousability and to decrease those asphyxiating environments. Smoking is a hugely important risk factor. 22% of SUIDs are attributed to smoking, and smoking plus bed sharing is bad news. And remember that even 1 cigarette a day during pregnancy doubles your risk of SIDS. Social networks and norms are powerful forces. These are where mothers get their information, and this is where mothers get their ideas for what they're supposed to do. Mothers seek information from multiple sources, so you want to be one of those sources, and you want to anticipate what other sources are telling her so that you can correct any misperceptions or misinformation that she's been getting. You want to find those safe sleep champions within the social network and use them to begin to change the norms. And finally, you want to use the norms to help you sell the message, because what we do every single day is a sales job. We are selling safe sleep. And so you want to give parents ideas for how to succeed, and you want to make sure that you're giving them positive feedback and encouragement. And so you want to always use that smiley face. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for keeping babies safe and sound.
Dr. Suzanne Bronheim will now present part 2 of the module, which will cover the Campaign with Conversations approach, a family-centered model.
Hello, I'm Suzanne Bronheim. I'm an Adjunct Associate Research Professor of Pediatrics at Georgetown University Medical Center. And today I want to talk with you a little bit about how can we do things differently in promoting safe sleep. As you heard from Rachel Moon's presentation that you just heard, our rates are stagnant, and I think we're all pretty frustrated about how do we make it better? How do we really make inroads on this issue? So today we're going to talk about what we need to do differently, how we can change ourselves and our behavior to make a difference. So we have to figure out something new because what we've been doing hasn't been working. And that means we have to have a different mindset, I believe. We're going to need some new skills and some new knowledge. And I want to talk today about why do we need what we've been calling a conversations approach to promoting safe sleep. So, we've done a lot of campaigns. We had Back to Sleep, we've had Safe to Sleep. I'm sure in your own state you've done campaigns, and those are very, very important to raise awareness because this is not something people know a lot about. But the current thinking in public health is that we need to have more tailored interventions. We have to go family by family, and this is a little daunting because there's a lot of families and maybe not so many of us. But we have to recognize that just putting it out there is not what's going to bring behavior change. We have to recognize that families are the ultimate decision makers in how they raise their babies. And that deciding to take a new behavior on, it has to be in a two-way communication. It's not just, I'm going to see a brochure, I'm going to see a PSA, and oh yes, of course I'll change my behavior. So let me talk about what might be different about what we're calling the conversations approach from what might be a common approach in the field now. And you may hear what I have to say and say, oh, I've always done this, and that's great, but you might be some tips you'll pick up or some additional ideas that you'll get. But it's not the way we've trained people to go out and do health promotion in the past. So first of all, this approach integrates the promotion of safe sleep and breastfeeding. And it only makes sense because if we do everything from the family's point of view, those things aren't separate. It's not like a little bucket about safe sleep and a little bucket about breastfeeding in their minds. What are the two things when we take a new baby home that we have to most be concerned about? Feeding and sleeping. I mean, they don't truly do a lot else, right? So we need to be talking about those together. The second, it's a real shift from telling recommendations to us not being the expert telling, but being an information resource and a partner in problem solving with families. And we'll get into what that means. And it's all about assumptions because what we do are based on our assumptions about what's the right thing to do, of course. And sometimes we're not even aware of quite what those assumptions are. So I want to be clear what the assumptions are when we talk about the conversations approach. First of all, it's that professionals and others who are working with families are not the experts about any given family. They have expertise about the issues and know the research, but the family knows the family, and they know about their social context that Dr. Moon talked about. There are things that they know that are very important if we're going to be successful. It's about information sharing and problem solving, not delivering messages. I spent a lot of years with people saying, boy, if we could just get the right message, families would change their behaviors. Well, that's not how it works. So we really have to think about a different approach. In the end, parents and other infant caregivers make decisions about where to sleep their babies and feed their babies. They're going to make those decisions. We can't make people do things, so we have to be respectful of that. Behavior change is not likely to happen by telling people or giving them facts and figures, although that's important. It has to be supported, that get their acceptance, and it has to, as I've said, have to be part of two-way communication, not just us telling. So at least I always like to have a nice theory behind what I'm going to do, so it makes sense. And the theory that has sort of supported the development of the idea of this conversations approach has been Asians' theory of planned behavior. It talks about how do we help people make changes to adopt something new and keep doing it. And in fact, a lot of the research about it has been done about how do we get physicians to try something new. But it works for almost anything. So there's 3 components to this theory. The first one is that the person has to have a positive perception about the behavior. They have to think it's a good idea. And sometimes, we think it's a great idea. We assume if we just tell them it's a good idea, they'll agree. But we know from focus groups with families that they'll say to us, yeah, we know those safe sleep recommendations, but we just don't agree with them. We don't think it's a good idea. Or they might be getting information from their social networks saying, yeah, they say that, but really it might not be a good idea. So we have to make sure that that's on board first, because of course nobody's going to do something if they don't think it's a good idea. Then others' beliefs about the behaviors, and you just heard Dr. Moon talk a great deal about that. This idea about normative beliefs that other people hold, if they think it's right and a good idea. And it could be those close networks, but it also can be society in general and how society lets us know. If you've been following work in the news, for example, stories about moms who want to breastfeed, and they want to breastfeed with their baby when they're out and about. Society gives a lot of negative feedback about that. So that influences whether people are going to adopt behaviors, their close networks and the general context. And then the one that I think that we have really been remiss on, at least in the safe sleep community, I think breastfeeding's done a better job, is what they call their perception of one's ability or level of control, their self-efficacy. Can I really do this? I might think it's a great idea, and everybody I know thinks it's a great idea, but when I actually think about doing it, I'm not sure if I can do it, or I don't know if I have enough control over my life to do it. So for example, Dr. Moon talked about not having people smoke around the baby. But if I'm living with my aunt and uncle, because that's the only place I can live, and my uncle smokes, I don't know if I can tell him to stop smoking. So we have to bring into bearing, when we work with families, planning for making sure that they can do this. They feel like they're able to, and that they've had support in dealing with the barriers that might keep them from doing it. So I've got this in for those of you who are visual learners. It's really the same thing about Asians' theory. But you can see how important perceived behavior control is, how important it is that I think I can do it, because it not only helps them intend to do it, but that's what's going to sustain their behavior over time. So I want to just give you a public health example of Asians' theory besides safe sleep and breastfeeding. And I know in West Virginia, you're working a lot around the issue of smoking for moms and for families. And so let's apply it to that. So way back when, before we knew smoking was bad for you, some of us who are old enough remember movies where somebody would be sick or injured, and the first thing somebody would do was give them a cigarette. And actually doctors were promoting cigarettes in ads. But we figured it out, and there was Surgeon General's warnings. There was a huge public health campaign about smoking being bad for your health and bad for you in many ways. PSAs, all sorts of things. And smoking did decrease to some extent, but still a lot of people smoke. So then it became, how do you put some of that pressure on from people who you care about and from society in general? I remember with my kids, they did a lot in schools, and kids would go home and harass their parents if they smoked, but in a good way, I think. And there were other places where people started saying, I don't want that smoke around me. We started having laws. Where I live, you can't smoke in a restaurant or in a shopping mall. At my university, you cannot smoke. So if somebody's still smoking, that makes it a little harder, and it makes them clear to them the idea of smoking cessation is really important. But even that's not enough, because we know stopping smoking is really hard. So we need to then have a plan with them and a way to help them with feeling like they can do it and remove the barriers. So now we have quit lines, smoking cessation programs, medications, other things. Same is true with safe sleep and breastfeeding. And we haven't paid enough attention to what can we do to support families. I mean, I remember when we first talked about back to sleep, we thought, isn't that easy? We just flip the babies over and we save lives. And then after a while it became, oh, it's not so easy. They really don't sleep as well on their back, and parents are tired and sleep deprived. So now what? People say, oh, breastfeeding is natural. That doesn't mean it's easy. So we have to attend to this piece of it as we go ahead and work with families. So one of the things of how do we get people to accept new things, Rogers, who talked, if you've heard of diffusion of innovations, but he's very big in how do you get people to try new things. And it was social marketing that he talked about, because he said, you know, we were very good at marketing toothpaste. We should be able to learn from them about how to market things that we think are for the social good. And what he says is that an innovation has to be communicated among people's social system, and there has to be a two-way communication that leads to diffusion, to the people accepting it. So you think about even the Asian theory for yourself. Let's apply it to, there's a new restaurant in town you heard about, you read about it, and you thought, oh, that sounds good, I think I'll go. And then you talk to a friend about it, and they say, yeah, I tried it, it really wasn't all that. You might not do it. So there has to be some opportunity to talk about things. So when we started thinking about, well, what would we talk about with families in a conversation? What do they need besides the recommendations that we give them? You know, back sleeping, in the crib, nothing in the crib, all those kind of things. What do they need? And what we've heard from families is they really need to know about the whys. Why would we recommend that? You know, we might all know the research, but not everybody does. Some of it doesn't seem like it makes much sense. And also, they need an opportunity to explore their doubts, their reluctance, and their personal barriers to implementing it. So it's not just go do it, but like, let's talk about what would it take? Why would you not want to? Can I give you more information? The other thing that families say is they are not prepared. So when they get faced with any challenges to safe sleep or breastfeeding, and of course, sleep deprivation is number one. Anybody who's brought home a new baby knows what that's like. They give up on their intentions, even though they said, oh yes, of course, I'm only gonna have the baby on the back. I have a good friend and colleague who had had 8 pregnancies to have 2 children. That second baby was a real premium baby. And she knew I was doing this work, and she came in one day and said to me, I know I'm supposed to sleep her on her back, but she just doesn't sleep well. So I kind of tilt her on her side and hope for the best. So if people don't have some plan in place for how they're going to handle the impact of these behaviors, we're not going to be successful. And then we have to help them anticipate those challenges and plan for them before taking their babies home. Because once you're home with that newborn baby, it's chaos. So what is this approach I'm hoping you'll think about adopting, what we're calling the conversations approach? What might be different? So first of all, it welcomes reluctance, resistance, and challenges. I think sometimes in the past, as we give our recommendations, we don't want to hear that I'm not going to do that. Or we feel upset when somebody says, well, I don't care what you say, I'm taking my baby in bed with me. But here we see it as an opportunity to have more conversations, be able to share more information and do some planning with people, and then respecting their decisions. It elicits positive and negative impact for others. We might talk about like, okay, so you think this is a good idea. What does your significant other think? We can ask about people in their social networks. What's your mom say about this? Because they might be in a position to support it or undermine it. We provide more information about areas that cause their reluctance, and we get a chance to address misinformation. You know, somebody might have heard something, and we all know what's out on the internet and social media. It's a great opportunity. What have you heard about this? And it leads to a plan for the family to implement their choices. And that's really important. And I think that's the piece that we have to make sure we add in, because Without some sort of planning and thinking it through, it's going to be hard. So it starts with asking permission to share important information about keeping babies safe and healthy. And I know some of you are in positions where you're required to have these conversations, but you can approach it by saying, I'm supposed to have this conversation with you, and I hope that's okay. And most people will say yes. I mean, if you have to, you'll say, well, if you just listen to me a bit, that would be good. But we want to at least make it seem like we're not coming in as the new sheriff in town to tell them what to do. It means sharing information with the whys about particular behaviors and how you could do that. It then means asking if they've heard this information and what do they think about it. It's not a message, it's a conversation. So we might say, babies should be sleeping on their backs. So what do you think about that? Have you heard that? What do you know about it? Does it make sense to you? Ask them if they're planning to do that. What are they going to do or not? If yes, how do they think they'll follow through with their plans? This is the beginning of developing a plan for them. What have they thought about? What happens if you're not getting much sleep at night? Is there anybody who's going to help you out? Are you and your spouse or significant other or somebody else going to take turns getting up at night? What have you thought about? If no, what makes you reluctant? And then talking about things that they don't want to or feel they can't implement and why, and addressing that. So they might say, I have to have the baby in bed with me because there's rats in my apartment and I'm afraid the baby will get bitten by a rat. I have to be there to protect them. Well, that opens a whole different conversation about, well, what can we do to keep your baby safe? Both from the rats, and if they're in the bed, can we talk about what makes the bed risky and are there any things you can do to mitigate that? And then problem solving to figure out how much of it they'll be able to do and how can we enhance the benefits within the parameters of their decisions. So again, if a mom says, okay, I've heard everything you've had to say, but the baby's going to be in bed with me. Well, this is the opportunity to continue the conversation, not to feel like, oh, I failed, but to say, all right, let's talk about that. Let me talk with you about the things that make it so risky to have a baby in the bed. There might be a space between the bed and the headboard and the wall. How are you going to change that? It's the blankets, it's the pillows. How are you going to take those out? How's the baby going to sleep and keep warm? How will you keep warm? It's about having other kids in the bed. How are you going to make sure your other kids don't climb in bed with the baby or the dog? Talking with them then about how can they implement what their choice is in a way that still can keep lesser risk for the baby. We know that it's risky, but we can think about the things that make it more risky and share that information with them and have them plan for it. So, and then actually creating a plan. We got this idea from it was a program at Rainbow Babies Hospital, and it was around getting moms to prenatal care. And what they found was sitting down with the mom and saying, okay, what is it that keeps you from getting here? And what can we do? What can you do? And who can help you so we can get past those barriers? And by having a plan in place, it really enhanced how often they got to their prenatal care appointments. And we said, that's what we need here. We need something about safe sleep, breastfeeding. What do you think will get in the way? How can we work with it? Who are the resources? Who can support you? And you've got a sample action plan in the module documents that you can look at to think about how could I work this through with someone. So I know there's some people listening who are going, oh my God, are you kidding me? I don't have time to do all that. I might be with somebody 10 minutes, I might see them once a month, and we recognize that. And that's why I want you to think about the conversations approach, not just as a series of steps, but really about changing your mindset, changing about how you think about what your role is and how you are partnering with families, not delivering information. So we thought about this. We said, some of you might be what we call conversation starters. So you might meet them one time or have very limited interaction. you still have a role. You can introduce the information and kind of see if they have any questions or concerns, and then figure out who could help them with that. So say to them, for example, well, I see you're not thinking that it's a great idea to breastfeed your baby. You're worried because you have to go back to work. Let me connect you with someone who can help you think about that more and give you more information. So your role is to begin to start the conversation and then do a handoff. Hopefully a warm handoff where you actually connect the person to some real person. But you still have an obligation to help make sure they get someplace that the conversation can continue. Then the people we've called conversation deepeners. So have ongoing interactions, might have limited time with the people or for a specific time, maybe just some prenatal visits. But you can really delve into their reluctance and challenges and give them more information, clear up misconceptions, and help them really think through their decisions in a different way. And then finally, we have what we called ongoing dialoguers, and I hope many of you are in this role. You have extended interactions over time in settings or programs that are there to give people in-depth support. And you can help them begin to make detailed plans and also hopefully be there for them from the time they start till when they get the baby home. And of course, we all know those great plans can go out the window if you have a baby who has a particular issue or a problem. So they know who to reach out to for help and support. If plan A didn't work, who can help them go to plan B and figure that out? So think about what your role might be and how you can rethink that role in terms of a conversations approach, even if you don't have the whole conversation steps as part of what your role could be. So to do this, we need a different kind of knowledge. I spent a lot of years going out training people to do safe sleep education, and what we talked about was, here's the rules, here's what you tell people, here's some statistics, here's some facts, and that was kind of it. But obviously, if you're going to have these conversations and explain why to people and what's going on and dealing with their reluctance, you're going to need a different kind of knowledge and something deeper. So let's start just with the idea of how do babies sleep. I think a lot of us don't know a great deal about this. And I think especially now people may not be around new babies much. They're not so clear about it. I know in my family, when we brought my daughter home, she's my oldest, and we put her down for the night, and we went to get in bed, and my husband said, I guess we have to set an alarm. I said, set an alarm? Why? And he said, well, don't we have to feed the baby at night? I said, oh, trust me, we will not need an alarm. And we didn't need an alarm for a long time after that either. But not everybody knows how infants are supposed to sleep. In fact, there's a whole industry out there now trying to help people understand what's happening with baby sleep and guaranteeing that your baby will sleep the night. So we need to really know the facts about infant sleep. So let's see how much of this you know. So, did you know that a healthy term newborn stomach is about the size of a hazelnut and holds only a few teaspoons of milk? By 10 days, they can take in 2 ounces, and even at the end of the first month, only 4 ounces. So they're gonna have to get up at night and eat. And even those people who try to tell you early on, give them extra or give them a little cereal, they've got little tiny stomachs, and those stomachs can't hold enough to keep them sleeping that long. So they're gonna wake up. So did you know that studies find that babies wake up an average of 1 or more times a night throughout the first year? So when people say, well, train your baby to sleep all night, we're fighting biology. Now, every baby's different, and some babies are great sleepers. My second was a champ, but not all babies are. And the biology tells us that that's just how babies sleep. So even this idea about feed them more and they'll sleep longer, aside from all the other issues it brings on, it may not work because they're not always just getting up because they're hungry once they get past those first couple months. That's just how babies sleep. also need a really good understanding of the current recommendations. And I think you got a very good grounding in that from Dr. Moon's presentation, but you might want to even delve more deeply for yourself, because families want to know why a recommendation is made so they can make an informed decision, not just because you told them so or you said, babies die if you don't do this. So some of the explanations are included in some attachments to this training module, so you can have them there for you, because it's a lot. Just think about how many recommendations there are that we're making to families. And I think that Dr. Moon helped make it more understandable by talking about how they relate to arousal versus other things, because the list is very long, and I think families' eyes sometimes glaze over as we go through this long list. So, can you explain why sleeping prone on the stomach is a serious risk to infants? I hope so, after you heard that great explanation from Dr. Moon, but let's just look at it. It increases the risk of them rebreathing the same air under their faces, and she showed you those little pictures. In young infants, sleeping on the stomach just actually affects how the nervous system works and can decrease oxygen to the brain. And it increases the baby's risk of getting overheated, which is a risk factor for SIDS. So, if they say to you, well, why is that? You want to be able to explain that and, make it make sense and talk to them in a way that they can understand the why, not just the what. Can you explain why breastfeeding is advantageous for infants and mothers? We always say, oh, it's the best, breast is best, or, we want to see babies breastfed. We have all these national and probably state goals for breastfeeding. People say, so why? I wasn't breastfed, my brothers and sisters we're all doing great. Why is it so great? So it's associated, obviously, with a reduced risk of SIDS, which is really important. But for people, they may not understand it can protect babies over the long term from many diseases, including ear infections, upper and lower respiratory infections, asthma, leukemia. There's lots of research coming out. Try to keep up on that. And children who are breastfed for 6 months are less likely to become obese. And we know that childhood obesity is a big problem in this country. And it seems to be related more to babies who've been bottle fed. So you want some knowledge, you want to be able to explain that. There's also lots of advantages for the mom, including long-term health advantages related to diseases they may or may not develop later on. So you want to be knowledgeable about that kind of thing so you can have a conversation with somebody in case it comes up. You also have to know, well, so they say to me, I'm not going to do that, or that seems like a strange idea, I don't think so, or my mother told me not to do that, or my husband doesn't want me to do that, or I'm worried that I can't do that. You want to be able to know how can you address those concerns. And so, for example, pacifiers. A lot of people, what did we tell people for years? Oh, pacifiers are bad. So they'll say to you, pacifiers are not supposed to be good for babies. Why are you telling me that's a good thing for my baby to prevent SIDS? So you want to know that the Academy of Pediatric Dentists says that it's easier to break a pacifier habit than a finger-sucking habit. And I can attest to that from having a child who was a thumb sucker. And as long as it doesn't continue after they get their permanent teeth, it's not going to affect their teeth in the long run. Reminder though, pacifiers should not be offered until breastfeeding is firmly established, and you shouldn't force a baby to take one. Some kids just don't like it. And if it falls out when the baby sleeps, the baby should not be wakened to give it back. Because when we first came out with this recommendation, we had nervous parents who said, oh, the pacifier's in, my baby's protected from SIDS, and they would hover over the baby while the baby slept and kept trying to push it back in and waking the baby up. That's not the point. In fact, the studies show you have to start sleeping with it. If it falls out, it's not a bigger protection. But you want to be able to explain that to somebody. Our parent who says, I smoke, so I guess I can't breastfeed. Do you have the knowledge to talk to them about that? So smoking's not good for a mother's health, and smoking around the baby leads to all kinds of problems that we all know about, and also later in life. So it's best if there's no smoking in the house, and the risks of bed sharing, as you heard from Dr. Moon, are astronomically higher if the mother smokes. That being said, If a mother smokes less than 20 cigarettes a day, they can typically actually breastfeed their baby with no problem. And because breastfeeding is beneficial and provides protections against infections and some of the problems caused by being with smoke, it's better for babies to be breastfed if their parents smoke. So there's knowledge about that. And you can access that and find that. There's also another set of skills that we need. And you may be very good at these, or you may have to think about some of them. So there's a skill about self-reflection, because remember, we're talking about having to change our own behavior. Sometimes that's not so easy. Sometimes we also will have concerns and reluctance and that sort of thing. So we have to be able to think about that and figure out how to address it, and maybe even talk with our colleagues. We have to know how to respectfully share information, not lecture, but share information, and how to get their opinions and get the conversation going and keeping it going, which is different than health education model. It's a conversation. So let's talk about self-reflection. First thing is, what do you think is your role? So if you think your role is to be an expert, then the conversations approach is going to be a little uncomfortable, and maybe not something you're going to be too excited about doing, and maybe not so successful at doing. Sometimes it's hard to move from the role of being an expert to being a resource of information. So thinking about that, watching yourself as you interact with families and saying, how is my role playing out here? What am I doing? What do I think this is? What do you think about families who do not implement safe sleep and breastfeeding, who don't stop smoking? Do you feel angry at them? Do you feel some condescension of what's wrong with them? Do you look at them and say, well, I understand, given what's going on, why that would happen? But what do you really think and feel about that? Because if you're having a conversation where you're asking people about, oh, why wouldn't you want to do this? You have to know about your own feelings, because that can get conveyed pretty easily in a conversation. So you want to think about that. How do you feel if you learn that a family does not embrace your recommended behaviors? Do you feel like a failure? If your role is that I'm an expert and they should do what I say, and yeah, you could feel like a failure. If you say, I'm sharing information and trying to work together with the family to support their decisions, then you realize that, if you've done your role of supporting and helping them plan and do the best they can, you're not a failure. But a lot of people get very worried, and they feel they'll be censured by colleagues if, oh, I heard she said to the mom it was okay to bed share. Well, you didn't say it was okay to bed share, but the mom said, I'm bed sharing. So you said, let's talk about that. How do we address the risks? What are your plans? It's a very different thing. You have to have a lot of self-confidence sometimes to make a behavior change. Another area of self-reflection that's really important, especially we've heard so much about the racial ethnic disparities in infant deaths, is thinking about unconscious bias. And of course, that seems a little strange, because how can you think about something that you don't know that you have? But there are ways to think about that. Stopping and saying to yourself, am I making any assumptions about how the conversation will go or not go with particular groups of people and based on their beliefs and values and what they do? I've had people say, oh, I don't talk to certain groups about this or that topic because I know they won't do it. No, that's a pretty big bias, and how are we withholding information from people? So think about that. Will that color what you do in your conversations? Do you have biases about how likely the family is to accept or implement your recommendations? This last one, how much will they understand of the information you plan to share? So sometimes people say, there are people I work with and they're not that educated. I don't think they can understand all of this. Well, then that's our job to figure out how do we convey it in a way that's understandable. But if we have that approach, if we think, this family won't understand it, we're not as likely to share as much information, and we're not as likely to do as good a job. Another skill is open communication. So especially in healthcare, we do a lot of asking questions where the answer is yes or no, or 4 times a week, or whatever. But we need to figure out how to ask questions in ways that are open-ended. What do you do about it? How does this work for you? It gives people an opportunity then to be more likely to say, oh, it's not working for you, for me. I think about myself. I used to always go to the dentist and he'd always say, and of course you're flossing every day. I always go, oh yeah. No, I was not flossing every day. But that was it. That was the end of the conversation, you know, and I think we've all probably lied, if you want to call it that, to some healthcare professional. Yes, I took every one of the antibiotic pills, or yes, I floss every day. One day he said, so what's going on with flossing? And I said, to tell you the truth, I really don't floss every day. I find it hard. I can't get in the back. I just don't like it. He said, oh, well, would you use a water pick? I said, sure. He said, okay, I'd rather you floss, but this is better than nothing. You open the communication, you can come to a whole different set of solutions. So we need to be able to do that, to watch ourselves. What are we saying? What are we asking? And we also have to recognize cultural beliefs and values, and not just the family's, your own. You may believe certain things are right or wrong about how to raise children, or what families should do, or how they should help each other, or any number of things. So be tuned into that, because you don't want to transmit that as a judgment on somebody who's trying to explain to you what's going on in their lives. Then, of course, another skill is co-creating these plans. And some of you I know probably do this all the time. I'm sure home visitors are probably really great at this. Some of the rest of us may not be so great at this. But how to help the family anticipate what's going to happen, find some solutions, means you have to learn a bit about the resources in your community that might be there to help them, and help them figure out who their resources are. And then really thinking about the cultural context of their communities and those social networks. How is that all going to work? So this is a skill that you need that's different than just educating about safe sleep. So here's some ideas of things you can ask to create a plan. For a family can say to themselves, or the mom or whoever, what do I need? Because sometimes there's things you need if you're going to bring a baby home, a crib. If you're going to be working and breastfeeding, you might need a breast pump. You might need some little blanket sleepers, because you're not going to put the baby in the bed with blankets. What are the things, what things do I need? What am I going to do? How are you going to get ready? You've decided what you want to do, how you want to sleep and feed your baby. So how are you going to get ready to do that? What do I need to know? There might be more information. They might need to learn a lot more about breastfeeding if they're going to implement it. They might need to learn about resources. There's all kinds of things. And then the big thing is who can help. Because in a time when we don't have so many extended families, or when everybody's really busy, how do you figure out how to get the support? Your mom may not come and stay with you the first month and let you sleep at night. So how are you going to deal with sleep deprivation is the big one, but even other things. I want to breastfeed, but what if I have a problem? Where do I turn? What if my baby's just screaming all night? What do I do? Who do I talk to? So helping them think about what might be bumps in the road and beginning to build an idea of who will they turn to, how can they get support, how will that help, and for you to help them with that. So the last piece of this is, just like families need support from each other, we all need support from each other. So the conversations approach can't be just the job of one of us. This is big, and there's a lot of families. It has to be at multiple times, over multiple settings. It could be when they go for their prenatal appointment. It could be when they have a home visitor come. It could be when they go to their Head Start program for their older kid. It could be any number of places. It could be in church. It could be in the mosque. It could be in a local program that they go to every day. We all need to have some skill with this, or be able to get people to someone who does. So we need all of us. And it has to happen not just prenatally, not just in the hospital, because we all know that's not a great place to try and talk to somebody about what they're going to do. They're exhausted and they're excited and they're scared. So we need to work on this before they get there, but we also have to have something after the baby's born. You know, we don't just drop them into the abyss. Okay, take your baby home, you plan to do this, go do it. We need to have some supports in place there. And that could be, again, any number of people, organizations, networks, but we want them involved and want them to know how to support families for safe sleep and breastfeeding and the other things they have to do. So states and communities have a real role in creating integrated systems. And it's a public health issue. So this public health approach to implementing and supporting a conversations approach is not just the work of each person who has a conversation. There really has to be a system that's supporting them. So if nothing else that you walk away from this today, I hope you think about the idea that the conversations approach is not just a bunch of steps. It's a change of our mindset. Because first we have to change our minds before we can influence other people's behavior and change their minds. It's a shift in how we think about our roles and what we do. And it may not always be a comfortable shift, and it may take some time, and it may seem hard, but we really have to do something different because those rates of SIDS are just not going down. And we need to implement breastfeeding to keep babies safe from SIDS and keep them healthy in the long run. So we're gonna have to bite the bullet, really, and change ourselves if we're gonna make this change. So here's this great thing: if you change nothing, nothing will change. We need to change what we're doing and how we're approaching promotion of safe sleep and breastfeeding for families in West Virginia. And it's so wonderful that all of you are willing to be a part of this and really help our babies be safe and sound for the long term. So we wanted to give you a little taste of what a conversation might look like. Now, I want you to realize these are just snippets. This is not the whole enchilada, as it were, but just to give you a sense, a little bit of how it might go. And the scripts for these are included in your PDF packet, so you can have that and use it in training if you want, or use this. And they show how to integrate a conversations approach with new parents. So we hope that'll be useful to you. Hi, Beverly. I hope you don't mind, but I asked my mom to come to our meeting today. Beverly, this is my mom, Beth.
Of course it's fine. I'm so happy to meet you, Beth. Mary's been talking about how much of a support you've been to her and how you plan to help her out after the baby's born.
Thanks for including me. Mary's been telling me things that you all have been talking about, stuff about like safe sleep and how she's going to feed the baby. I'm just not so sure I agree with what she has been thinking about, so I just wanted to talk to you about it.
I'm so happy to talk about it. It's important that you feel comfortable with these issues since you will be helping Mary with the baby. What are you concerned about?
Well, for starters, Mary says the baby is supposed to sleep on her back. I seem to remember that in my day, we thought it was actually dangerous. I mean, if the baby spits up in her sleep, she could choke and die. So why are you telling her that sleeping on the back is the best way to protect the baby?
That is a great question. Sometimes the advice parents get changes over time as we better understand what keeps babies safe. Let me answer your main concern first, and then we'll talk about why sleeping on the back is safer. I'm going to show you this picture. As you can see, there are two sort of tubes that come from the baby's mouth. One is called the esophagus and goes to the baby's stomach. Food goes down it, and when the baby spits up, that's where it comes up from. The other one is called the trachea, and that is the breathing tube that goes to the baby's lungs. Look at the picture. When the baby's on her back, The trachea is on top of the esophagus. So if the baby spits up, gravity will keep it below the trachea and it can slide back down. If the baby's on her stomach, when she spits up, gravity can pull it down in front of the trachea, making it easier for the baby to choke or breathe it in. Does that make sense?
Okay, yes, it does. I guess the way we understand things really do change. So you mentioned we would talk about other reasons that sleeping on the back is better.
We now know that when babies sleep on their stomachs, they are over 200% more likely to die. One reason is because they can rebreathe the same air that's under their faces, and after a while, they don't have enough oxygen in their blood. Little babies often can't pick up their heads and turn them to get fresh air the way we might.
That can't be good.
No. Also, when babies sleep on their stomach, they are more likely to get overheated, which is associated with a greater risk of death. And sleeping on the stomach changes how the nervous system controls how their hearts function and can actually decrease oxygen to the brain during sleep.
That's weird. I always like to sleep on my stomach.
Me too. But babies are built differently from adults, so we have to protect them. Any other questions?
Yes, Mary's also been talking about breastfeeding, but I have heard that babies who are breastfed don't gain weight as fast as those that are bottle fed. Shouldn't she also give the baby some formula?
Well, babies fed formula may weigh more, but that is not necessarily a good thing. I know people sometimes think that a nice chubby baby is healthier, but babies grow at their own rate. Also, breastfed babies learn to eat only based on how hungry they are, and that may help them keep from getting overweight when they're older. I know I often want to eat when I'm not hungry. I wish my body had learned that lesson.
Okay, but what if the baby isn't gaining weight?
The baby's doctor should be monitoring her weight and talk with you about any problems. Also, Mary and I have talked about where she can get help with breastfeeding. We have lactation consultants, which are people who know about breastfeeding here in our community. Breastfeeding is natural, but not always super easy. So it's important to be able to call on people who know the tips and tricks to be successful. So I hear you will be here to help after the baby's born. What plans do you have to help? New parents are always tired because babies just don't sleep all night like we do, and she will be breastfeeding for the first time.
We have already talked about how I can help out with the cooking and housework so she can get in some naps during the day. If she breastfeeds, I guess I can't feed the baby, but I can make healthy meals for her. I will also help her remember to reach out to the lactation consultant too.
Well, Mary's very lucky to have your help, and having a plan is important. She's been working on her own plan, so the two of you should talk about how you will fit into that. And please, if you have any more questions, feel free to ask me.
Beverly, thanks so much. Mom and I have been talking about all this, and it helps to have her talk to you. Now I think we can be on the same page.
I agree.
Hello, Melissa. My name is Lee Ann. Come in. It's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too.
So I understand that you are now 4 months pregnant, is that right?
Yes,
So how are things going so far?
better now. I had a lot of morning sickness, really all day sickness, but I'm feeling much better now.
Well, great. That's good to hear. That can be really hard. So is this your first baby?
Yes.
Well, today, if it's okay, I'd just like to talk to you about the two things that can be the most important when you bring a new baby home. They're sleeping and eating.
I've been thinking about it, and my husband and I are worried about not getting much sleep, and we want to know how to get the baby to sleep through the night as soon as possible.
I hear you. But actually, babies are not really built to sleep through the night for several months. So they need to eat frequently because their stomach is really small, and they don't just wake up because they're hungry. They just aren't ready to sleep through the night for a while. So later on, we can talk about making some plans for you and Dad so that you can actually get more sleep.
Wow, I hope we can deal with this.
Of course, that is why it's important to think about it now and to plan. But I want to share with you some really important information about keeping your baby safe while he is sleeping. I want you to know what to do to keep your baby safe, okay?
Sure.
First, it is very important that every time you or anyone who takes care of your baby puts your baby down to sleep, that you put him on his back. He should sleep on a firm surface, nothing soft or fluffy under him. Just a sheet and nothing else in the crib or bassinet. He should never sleep in a car seat, stroller, swing, or bouncer. And no blankets, toys, or bumper pads. It's really important that a baby is not put to sleep on a couch or an adult mattress.
Wait, I don't get something. Won't the baby get cold without a blanket? The winters around here are pretty bad.
Well, babies only need to be as warm as you would be, so actually having them get overheated is not safe. It can make them more likely to die during their sleep, so no hats at night either. And also, blankets and toys and bumper pads can accidentally cover the baby's face and suffocate them. In the winter, you can use a sleep sack. Let's see, I will add that to the list of things on our plan. I'll tell you how you can find one and be ready for the baby.
Okay, you mentioned that the baby shouldn't sleep in an adult bed, but my friend told me that is the best way to get the baby to sleep at night is to take him into bed with her.
Well, yes, people do that, but they are taking a risk. The baby should sleep in your room close to you, but the adult bed has a number of problems. First, the pillows and blankets can cover the baby's face and lead to suffocation. Also, now we have those really super soft pillow top mattresses, and if the baby gets face down on one, suffocation can be a problem as well. What we have learned that can be a bigger risk is an adult in the bed rolling over on the baby. So the baby should sleep by himself in a crib to be the safest. At night, when you go to feed the baby, you can bring him into the bed, but then put him back to sleep in his own space to stay safe.
I'll have to think about that since me and Jeff really need our sleep.
Well, we have time until the baby comes to talk about that. But also another important way to keep your baby safe while sleeping is also important for his health, is how you're going to feed your baby. It is recommended that you breastfeed your baby exclusively for the first 6 months, and that means nothing else to eat or drink except breast milk. And when you breastfeed your baby, he gets exactly the nutrients and vitamins he will need. A bonus is that he gets antibodies, and they will help protect your baby from getting sick. He will also thank you when he gets older because breastfed babies are less likely to be obese.
Oh, I don't think so. My friend tried breastfeeding and she said it was really hard and the baby was always hungry. Anyway, I'm pretty small-chested, so I probably can't do it.
Well, I'll be honest, breastfeeding can be difficult sometimes, but I think with help you can do it. Let's see if we can get you to meet with one of our breastfeeding experts before the baby is born. And I'll tell you that the size of your breast has nothing to do with how well things will go.
Well, we'll see. Maybe I could talk to that person who is an expert before I decide.
Well, it has been good talking to you. Next time we meet, I will be happy to answer more questions. So I mentioned making a plan, so by the time the baby gets here, you are ready. One of the first things I think we should do on your plan, if you agree, is to talk to your husband about what we've discussed and to anyone else who may help you with the baby to see what they're thinking. We want everybody to be on the same page. I'll be happy to answer any of their questions also. Second, let's talk about who can help you out when the baby comes. Who might be able to get you some of those little naps or to help you with cooking or cleaning. And finally, I will connect you with the breastfeeding expert if you like.
Yeah, I could do that. It makes sense. Talking to the others is a really good idea, especially my mom. She's pretty opinionated, and we have already had some discussions about how I should start taking care of myself when I'm pregnant. She actually kept pushing me to stop working.
Okay, great. Looking forward to seeing you the next time. And here is a chart I've started for your plan. You can take a copy of this, and we'll just keep working on it.
So I want to thank you so much for spending this time and being willing to think about changing your mind, because it's going to be important. The work that you do is so important, and we thank you for helping to keep the babies in West Virginia safe and sound.
We would like to thank our sponsors, Team for West Virginia Children and CAMC Health Education Research Institute, and our funding partners, the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation, the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources, and the West Virginia Perinatal Partnership for their support in developing this training. The importance of your role in educating and partnering with families to help reduce and prevent infant sleep-related causes of death in West Virginia cannot be overstated. Thank you for working to ensure West Virginia babies celebrate their first birthday and beyond.